Baxy's Musical Podcast is brought to you by Canna Provisions, an adult-use cannabis dispensary that has the largest selection of cannabis products in Western Massachusetts, with locations both in Holyoke and in Lee. They're much more than a dispensary. They're a destination. Check them out at cannaprovisions.com. That's cannaprovisions.com. Please be over 21 and please consume responsibly.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
In 1987, I had a roommate whose name was Dave. Now, Dave worked in a very trendy record store back then and would regularly come home with a big, thick, fat stack of records every week. Now, most of them were for bands that I was not even aware of, at least not yet. But on occasion, he would get his hands on stuff that I did enjoy. And on this particular summer day, Dave presented me with a copy of the 1987 self-titled album by Echo and the Bunnymen, an album that, I should point out, had been signed by 3 members of the band. And I was such a big fan of the Bunnymen back then, I thought this was great. But because it was a signed copy, Dave insisted that it never get played, because doing so would decrease the value of this particular record. Now, I ignored that suggestion and played it anyway because I never had any intention of selling it. I only had plans to play it, and play it loudly. 35 years later, the record is still in my possession, and I'm talking to Echo and the Bunnymen guitar player Will Sargent today, so today is a pretty big day. Now, depending on who you want to believe, the very second best band to ever come out of Liverpool, England, was the Beatles. There are also some people who would tell you that the Beatles were slightly better than second place. A compelling case could be made either way, because there's also a very good chance that either number 1 or number 2 on that list was Echo and the Bunnymen. Since 1979, Echo and the Bunnymen have released 13 studio albums, 10 live albums, and 30 singles. And between 1979 to 1987, the classic lineup of Echo and the Bunnymen, featuring Will Sargent, Ian McCulloch, Les Patterson, and Pete DeFreitas, hit the UK Top 40 12 times with classics like The Killing Moon, The Cutter, Lips Like Sugar, The Back of Love, Never Stop, Seven Seas, and quite a few more. This was a band that was built on an undeniable legacy throughout the world, and Will Sargent has been through every single step along the way. In fact, he's the band's longest-serving member, and while Will Sargent and Ian McCulloch have been touring over the last few months, Will was able to release the first of 3 autobiographies, the first one entitled Bunnymen, which is now available wherever you buy books. And as a longtime fan, it was a hell of a thrill to finally get a chance to talk to the guy who signed my record, Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen, on Baxy's Musical Podcast. I want to show you something that, back in the 80s, I had a roommate who worked at a record store. And he comes back to the apartment after a day of work, and he hands me this. He says, "I got you a present." And he gives me the 1987 Echo and the Bunnymen record.
Yeah.
On the back, 3 of you guys have signed it. Now,
Right.
I was told to never play this, ever. Don't ever put it on a turntable because it would affect the value. And I said, of course I'm going to play this record. So long and the short of it is I played the living hell out of this record for years, and I absolutely loved it. And then one of the things I cannot figure out is which one of you guys were signing this. I mean, I definitely have your signature here, and I think that's less there, and I don't know. And this is the one I can't understand.
That's Pete.
That's definitely Pete. So that's interesting. So now that makes it.
They need Mac on there.
Yeah.
Mac on there.
So I don't know if that's if it makes it any more valuable, but that is something that has been in my collection since the very day it came out in the U.S. So that was awesome.
You can definitely say that's Pete.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure, knowing what what unfortunately happened to him. But I have to tell you, I mean, you guys could write great songs, but your penmanship is terrible. So, congratulations on the book. I'm about 50 pages away from finishing it, and I've really enjoyed every bit of it. And I was reading that the plan is that there are 2 more volumes coming out. Tell me about that and the process of going back and re-looking at all of these things in your life and in your career, especially as it starts to get closer and closer to the band developing and becoming successful. Tell me about that.
Well, the story's already written, isn't it? And it's like written in here. The way I see it, it's probably not the same way as like Les or Pete or Matt would have seen it. You know what I mean? But it's my story, so that's it. This is the way I've seen it, and as far as I'm concerned, it's the true version. So I like to be kind of fair with everybody, and yeah, it's not that difficult because it's and plus, like, it's brilliant having the internet because you can go back and you get the exact day when you did a particular gig where something weird happened. Like I'm just about to write about a gig with Madness and Bad Manners, and it was like an experimental kind of like lineup, because these sort of like skinhead bands or whatever. So Bad Manners go on, they started getting a load of grief because they had a black drummer from the crowd, and they managed to get through their set. We went on, they hated us, and we were getting bottles thrown at us and all that. It was in the days when you could still have bottles in the auditorium or whatever. It was in this place called Electric Ballroom. It was in London. I went there to see the Ramones as well, but at the same time. And so we're getting bottled off, and we lasted about 3 or 4 songs. And it was all like Skinhead, Zeke Hyland, chanting, all that stuff. It was a weird period over here where the far right had become like a thing, and they sort of drafted in the skinheads as their kind of stormtroopers, who would all just get used like puppet, like a puppet situation from these like nutters that were,
That always seemed like a really weird, a really weird thing to have developed, in post-war England. England,
yeah,
London was bombed, and you talk about the ramifications of World War II. It seems weird to me that there would be so much alliance with, Nazism with the skinheads in that environment. It just seemed like a very strange thing to develop out of what England had just been through 15 plus years ahead of them.
yeah. Well, I don't think there's a lot of thought goes into it. Not like sitting around, discussing it in a philosophical manner. It's just like they like to ruck, they like to have a fight, and they like to point fingers at people, and it's the people that they were like sort of in the sort of leadership.
Right.
They're the ones that regulating these, not exactly A grade students or whatever. Like I wasn't, what I mean? But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but you know, they weren't exactly deep thinkers, most of them.
So whose great idea was it to put you on the same stage as Madness and Bad Manners?
Well, that's one of the things in research, and I spoke to Bill Drummond about it. He remembered it. We couldn't remember who it was like. Yeah, we want to do this kind of radical mix up of the bands. The new bands coming through. It's like it was probably it was 19. I think it was 1980. Might have been 79. I'll have to look at the dates, but I'm pretty sure it was Pete DeFreitas's first gig.
That's a hell of a first gig.
Well, yeah, there's a whole embarrassment factor of that as well. Like, we had this young lad playing drums. He's only like, and we're getting bottled off by skinheads, Zeke Island, and it's like, welcome to our world. So I remember I seem to remember being a bit like, God, this is Pete's first gig, and this has happened. Like, it was either his first or very, because we didn't do many gigs, and they were kind of spread out quite a bit. There wasn't like a tour, odd gigs every now and then. It was only later on we started getting into like doing proper tours. Once the album was out, we could have like tour support from the record label, and that enabled us to get like a good sound man and sort of stuff.
Well, you guys had pretty good success almost right out of the gate. The first singles come out and the first album comes out, and you guys were very, very different from a lot of the bands at the time, or at least it seems. If you want to talk about a post-punk genre, or at least a period of time, what's interesting to me is that everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and that no one's really trying that hard to be like somebody else. You're not emulating too much, and I think you guys certainly had a uniqueness that is very different from The Cure or Susie and the Banshees, or any of the other bands, or The Fall, or any of those other bands that were around approximately the same time. Everyone was trying very hard to do something unique, and I think it's one of the fascinating parts about those early '80s and those and that time. Were you purposely trying to be different, or were you just doing what you do?
No, we were. it was like four characters all putting in their own ideas, and nobody was like kind of saying, "Oh no, I want it this way," or you can't play the drums like that or whatever. And it was like, so you've got like four different views on the whole thing all coming together, and it kind of gels in a weird way. So you get like an odd mix and a melange of like sound. And I think the other bands were doing the same thing. The Cure and that, they had like a lot of input from like the other members and all that stuff. It wasn't all down to Robert Smith. And it was a lot of it was because we didn't really know how it worked. I didn't know how to construct a song particularly. I knew, okay, these chords sound good. Let's go. We need something else for a chorus or whatever. Let's try these chords, and you try. It'd be a bit of trial and error before you found the right ones. And then it just sort of happened, and nobody was thinking about it that much.
Right.
It was just like good. And if it did remind you of something, if it was a band that you liked, the Velvets or the Fall or the Doors or whatever, I'd be kind of pleased.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh, the Doors, that's great. Because I love the Doors. But if it sounded like Kajagoogoo or I don't know, Culture Club, it'd be like, nah, it's all right. we'll get rid of that.
I can see where a band might fight that urge.
Yeah, and we avoided a lot of the obvious 80s sounds. Everyone had that synthesizer, the DX7 had that like crystally FM bright bell kind of sound that was all over like Howard Jones records or whatever. That's not rock and roll. We wanted the sounds to be a bit scuzzy and a bit kind of like cheap and nasty like the Velvets. It was a toss up, and it was always a fight as well, because we were always like, the record company obviously wanted us to sound slick and all that. I didn't want to sound slick, not why I was doing it, and I wasn't learning other people's songs or trying to learn ZZ Top riffs or anything. You know what I mean? I'm not interested.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like a band, but not what I wanted to do. Not after punk. And it wasn't really called post-punk then. We still considered ourselves punks. It was just, this is the way punk was kind of veering. To me, the bands that were like lumped in with punk were like, they were interesting as well, like Perubu, Wire, even The Fall, and they weren't just like 2-minute kind of like angry rants, were they? They were kind of, there was a bit more to it. And so that was a lot of, like, I liked a lot of the American stuff, Television, Talking Heads, all that stuff. All them bands, they were the more interesting sort of things to me. Obviously we had Joy Division, then, and Wire and Gang of Four. They were all great. I loved all them bands. Subway Set, but I wasn't too keen on, I don't know, like the ones that were just out and out kind of punky. Yeah, the Ramones did that better than anybody else anyway.
What's interesting, I was just, that early punk starts off, with kids not really knowing how to write a song, not knowing how to play how their instruments, and not really knowing that much about music in general. But then all of a sudden, with all the practice and all the rehearsal, you get better at all of that stuff. That's why I think, that point, like 1978 through maybe 84, 85, maybe, there's just an explosion of great bands that, yeah, you're right. I mean, they are born out of punk. You wouldn't necessarily draw a parallel between like the first couple of Damned records or the Sex Pistols, but it is all kind of lumped under an umbrella, and you all are kind of coming off with the same types of inspiration. And I think that's one of the things that was so compelling about Echo and the Bunnymen, is that they were right in the middle of that, and in many ways, it was almost like, in some ways, the best of the bunch.
Well, I think we did have a lot of, like, even so, saying that we weren't like trying to be like certain bands or typical rock bands, there was a rock element there. Phileas Terrace is quite rocky. It's still got like rock elements, and I think to an American audience that was still sort of like a palatable thing. I don't think like Devo are massive in America, aren't they? But they weren't then. They were kind of weird, in Peru. So we come along and we're like, it's still rock really, but it's got like psychedelic elements, and it's got like new wave kind of elements. Like we hated all them terms. I hated new wave, the word post punk. That only came later when they had to think of something to call it. Like get called new psychedelia or um, raincoat, long Mac stuff, or gloomy, this sort of thing. We did like gloomy stuff.
You mentioned in the book the kinds of music that you were listening to when you were young, and Jethro Tull was a band for you. But then there were also other bands that not just influenced you, but they really influenced a lot. Status Quo, Doctor Feelgood, the sensational Alex Harvey Band. I mean, those are like three bands that here in the States are almost unheard of. I mean, apart from maybe one hit there from Status Quo or whatever, but they had no influence here in the United States, but they had massive influence in the UK. Tell me about those bands and why they were important to you.
Well, Dr. Feelgood, they had this great guitarist called Wilco Johnson who could sort of play lead and rhythm at the same time
Mm.
because he did this weird flicky thing on the guitar where he sort of strum it down and then on the way up, his fingers had moved a little bit and he'd do like a little riff on the way up. So it was kind of like, how the hell's he doing that? And they, when you went to see them, you were just waiting for Wilco to kick off because the place used to just go nuts. They were just basically rhythm and blues songs. There were a lot of them were cover versions, old songs. Alex Harvey Band, they had a theatrical element that was like Alex Harvey's attitude on stage was not a million miles away from Johnny Rotten.
No, it wasn't.
Disdain for the audience. There was like that sort of thing, but they had a sort of comic book kind of vibe about them as well. They were they were like almost like superheroes or something. They all wore like kind of tight jumpsuits and stuff. And it sounds really cheesy, but when you're 14, it was great.
Yeah. As I'm reading the book, I'm going onto YouTube to say, well, I don't know enough about the Alex Harvey Band, so I went on YouTube and tried to see exactly what you described, and I saw it. I'm like, okay, I can see. If I'm 14 years old, you're absolutely right. That would be one of the bands I would fall in love with.
The same reason why people like them hair bands in the 80s. When you're that age, you like all that stuff. I don't know why. It's just you want your pop stars and your rock stars to be larger than life. And so was Wilco Johnson, and so was Lee Brillo, the singer with Dr. Feelgood. And who else did you mention? It was the
well, Status Quo was the other one.
oh yeah, well, Quo were they were just pure power, And and like they always go on about like Quo, they only know three chords, but they don't. They know way more than three chords, and it's like they know how to rock,
Yeah.
And it's like same DC. It's the same sort of thing. AC/DC became massive worldwide. Quo were just as good. And, I don't know why. Like I saw AC/DC at Eric's with Bon Scott, not at Eric's, at the stadium in Liverpool with Bon Scott. And it was amazing, Angus Young was actually 15 time,
I know.
He had that little school uniform on. And they had like that gimmick, a school kid. And he was actually a school kid. But Quo were we all went to see Quo because they were kind of like a biker band. They was kind of like flirting with the biker kind of thing, And it's sort of they were tied in with a hippie movement as well. It was like in the 70s, early 70s, hippie had sort of gone away from all flower power and all that, and it had gone into this kind of like other area. It was a bit more Hell's Angel, a bit more kind of threatening. You had all them riots in '68 and that, outside Grosvenor Square and the American Embassy about Vietnam and all the rest of it. It's sort of gone a bit heavier. It wasn't all like give them a flower. It was like give them a punch. So Quo was a band that they were like to us they were like a biker band.
So when you're a kid growing up in Liverpool, when most people everywhere else think of Liverpool, they're really only thinking about one thing. And I would imagine as a kid who's got an interest in music and comes from a tough background, the idea of being the next Beatles or the idea of having that example come from your own hometown is different than someone who's taking the Beatles as an inspiration from 3,000 miles away, where it just doesn't seem plausible that you could make records or go on tour or have any level of fame. What kind of influence did the Beatles have as like just like a hometown hero type of situation, or did it matter to you that they were from Liverpool?
It was kind of not as much a big deal as it is now. Like they built kind of like tourist industry around the Beatles now. But then when punk was going 77 and all that, when I started going to Eric's, it was nobody mentioned them, nobody gave a shit about them. They were like, they were a massive band around the world and all that, but they hadn't got the marketing right. They haven't become like marketed as well as they are now. Like obviously amazing records. They are brilliant records. And I said in an interview back then, I said I ate the Beatles, but I didn't hate anything, but it was just something to say to be slightly controversial. But one of our first things in the paper, it was like the new Mersey beat, and we were all a bit pissed off with that. Well, we're not the Mersey beat, we're not anything. We don't want to be affiliated to anybody. We're our own thing. It doesn't matter where we're from. That was kind of the thing then. Like I remember I didn't come from actual Liverpool. I'm like 8 miles outside Liverpool. It doesn't sound like much, but to this country, like what I mean, our enemies are just down the motorway in Manchester. It's only a mile away. They might as well be, Russia and the Ukraine or something. It's like that heavy. Like you could wear a Manchester United badge in Liverpool and get your head kicked in. But it's all to do with football and tribalism and stupid stuff like that. Like my mate, Road Denko, he actually did get his head kicked in Liverpool for having a Man United fan. Funnily enough, his dad was Ukrainian. It's weird. Yeah, so I did like the psychedelic side of the Beatles. I loved all, Within You, Without You, all the George stuff. Tomorrow Never Knows was great, and Hey Bulldog and all them things, Helter Skelter. They're all great things, but some of them I can live without. Long and Winding Road, whatever. Like it's a brilliant song, but I wouldn't be listening. Not my kind of cup of tea.
One of the first songs that I heard from Echo the Bunnymen that instantly caught my ear was "The Cutter" from the Porcupine record. I just thought such a great song. As I'm reading, I'm reading the story about the record company's reaction to Porcupine, and that it wasn't particularly favorable, and that they wanted you to re-record the entire thing. And I can imagine, as a young man who's trying to establish his career, when an authority figure tells you to do it all over again, and you're proud of what you've done, that the reaction to that probably isn't exactly, "Oh no, we'd be happy to re-record it again." Um, Tell me about the relationship that you guys had with record companies, because I know that's not the only incident in which there was some disagreement about the direction you were going in.
Yeah, we got that all the time because, like I say, we were coming from kind of an underground world of La Fall and Subway Sect and all this sort of stuff. And they wanted us to sound nice, and like we wanted to sound how we wanted to sound. Like it's weird, all these people on the outside, they think they know what you should sound like when you're the one playing the bloody stuff. And like, to be fair, they did stick with us, they stuck with us. Probably nowadays we'd have been dropped. The first record, although it might have seemed successful or whatever, it only sold 30,000 copies or something, which is not a lot. Even then, like it'll sell more than that now, but then it wouldn't have. It was like nothing really. I think eventually we got a silver disc for it or something. We were always arguing with them. It was like, why have you done it like that? Because that's the way we want it to sound. Like, they couldn't get their heads around it. Why don't you want to sound like Phil Collins? You know what I mean? Like, why don't you sound like these big production things? And they brought us in one day and they played us, Sledgehammer
From Peter
by,
Gabriel.
and it's all done on bare light and it's all crisp and amazing sound and all that. So, want you to sound like that? And we're like looking at each other thinking, well, we don't want to sound like that. It was like stuff like that all the time, like crazy stuff where they just missed the point of what we're about. We wanted to be dangerous and a bit like, like the Doors or the Velvets. We did go in and do Porcupine again, like, and changed quite a lot. Kept some of it, I think, but we've changed a lot. And to be fair, the Cutter did turn out better than the original one. You've got people pushing you all the time to do things, so it's sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it always annoys you.
A while back, I had an interview with Andy Partridge, and from XTC, and he was
I
telling
thought you
us,
were going
yeah, he was telling a story about how the record company wanted them to sound like ZZ Top, which to me
to
is
God.
absolutely comical. So, I mean, you're telling a guy like Andy Partridge to sound like those guys. It's just, did you not hear everything I've produced for the last 8 years?
Yeah, not the ZZ Top when they did Fandango and all that stuff.
Right.
It's the ZZ Top when Sharp Dressed Man and all that. All them sorts of like cheesy 80s big snare drum sound things. I know what you mean. I know Andy Partridge he's a proper psych merchant and he psychedelia.
When you guys come up with a song like Killing Moon, when you write a song like that and you produce it and you realize that you got something kind of special, to me, there must be an anticipation with the artist when they come up with something that they know is good. That you
Well,
must be like sitting on your hands and saying, I can't wait for this to get out in the world. Or did you not see it as having the importance that it had for people?
like we all liked it and we thought it was great. But there was like elements in there that are a bit out there, and we don't know whether they've become accepted. Like there's like that whole kind of like in the choruses, it like sweeps in with like a reverse reverb thing, and it's kind of like it's not exactly happy. It's sort of grown into its own being almost like through like people using it in films and all that stuff. And the mood of it is amazing. It's kind of like a mood piece. So they use it in films a lot, and it's sort of developed into this other thing. I don't really know. At the time, I remember thinking this is great, but we put real drums on it at the beginning. Like it's got real drums on, but they had like a proper drum kit with sticks. Pete had done like a whole thing with sticks. And I think it was Mac that said he didn't like the sticks. He thought it was too ordinary, and he
Really?
got Pete to. So this is like, yeah, this is a major deal. This is like you've got a 24-track recording. It's a tape. There's no click track. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's not MIDI it all up and make it all synced up. We had to rub off all the drums, and Pete re-drummed it using brushes. So it gave it that sort of like real kind of almost like a jazzy kind of more loose kind of feel. Pretty sure it was Mac that thought of that. Thought let's try it with the brushes because he'd been experimenting with brushes and stuff. Um, and we were really into that song "Take Five," by Dave Brubeck. And
Mhm.
there's like the whole drum solo bit in the middle, which is all like this sort of like amazing brush work. So we went into the studio in Liverpool, and he redid it. But you had to just rub off the drums because it was 24-track tape. 10 of the tracks are probably drums. That's an amazing thing for somebody to do, without a click. You
Yeah.
just play it to the back, just showed how great a drummer he was.
I want to ask you about that. Pete died in an accident, after that album in '87, and then you guys fracture kind of after that. I mean, the band kind of falls apart, and Ian does his own thing for a while, and you and Les decide to keep things together. I mean, I know that was not an easy decision to keep going on, and it probably wasn't an easy decision to decide to take a break for a while, but I think in any band, you're always kind of fighting obstacles, whether it's internally, in this case, a death of one of your members. I mean, these are pretty significant obstacles to overcome. As a guy in the middle of all of that, and a guy that wants to keep this thing going, how hard was that of a decision to make to keep going after losing Ian and Pete within a year?
It was very hard, but it was like the bloke from the record label phoned us up, and he knew Mac was leaving and all that, and he said, "Why don't you just get another singer?" And at that point, the relationship between us wasn't great, because he said it. It starts, I think, well, maybe we can. Like Buzzcocks did it, Genesis did it, such and such did it. They've got Fleetwood Mac did it. You know what I mean? So it's like, it seemed to be like a thing that in the 70s or whatever that people were always changing, members of bands and things and singers and stuff like that. So it was kind of, in my heart, I knew it was like a bit of a crap thing, but because the relationship was so weird anyway, and we've done 10, you got to remember, we've done like 10 years of work to get to where we were. And it was kind of like, oh man, that's it. We're all just thrown on the scrap heap. It's the same thing happened with Pink Floyd, isn't it? It's like, when Waters left, and the others just carried on.
Yeah.
It's kind of caused a bad vibe. And it's still a bad vibe now.
Yeah. Even worse.
We did it and carried on. Then Pete got killed. And we thought, well, we've come this far, we'll carry on. The day that Pete got killed, Jake was fixing his motorbike. He was our keyboard player, Lat in Liverpool. And the lad that turned up to ask him, can you help me fix my motorbike, was Damon Reese, who became our drummer.
Oh, really?
That's weird, isn't it?
It is weird.
Like,
So jump ahead a couple of years. You and Ian, at this point, I think, Les has decided to kind of retire from music, but you and Ian decide to reform the band and start performing again. What was the reaction that the two of you felt when you start playing live again? Were you surprised by the reaction? What did that feel like?
When you're in a band and like everything has just happened as though it was destined to happen, you feel like you're invincible. It's a weird thing. It's like when he left, none of us were that bothered until like the reality hits. It takes time for you to sort of think, wait a minute, it was quite important. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's just, you just kind of fall into it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird.
You guys are, I know, as far as the tour, you're touring now, I know you postponed a bunch of dates and you will be touring again, but where is the status of you guys performing live right now? And you're doing a couple festivals, or at least you're scheduled for a couple of festivals, I think May or June. But as far as, getting back on the road with the COVID, restrictions and cancellations, where are you guys at right now?
Well, we've just done a tour for 5 weeks around Britain, and we went to Ireland and Scotland as well.
Right.
And it was great. Played amazingly. The crowd were going nuts. And it was a bit weird here and there because we're not getting on particularly well, I'd say.
Yeah.
But that doesn't affect our playing. It doesn't affect our gig,
Yeah.
We still put like everything into that. And it was good. I enjoyed it. I missed it, and great getting back out there. We did some brilliant gigs.
With your relationship with Ian as it stands now, I mean, can you foresee ever making new music again? I mean, I know you just re-released the first 4 records on vinyl, but as far as like new stuff, I mean, do you think that's still a possibility?
We have done some new stuff, I've played on a few of these things, and I don't know. I don't really know what's going on with it.
Well, I hope you do. I mean, as a fan, you never want to stop hearing new stuff.
Yeah, it's just not the same anymore.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't really get much input. That's all. No. So it's not. It's like it's not the same. It doesn't have the same. Like I like being creative, and I'm not being that creative. I'm not allowed.
But as far as working with Ian creatively, the times are different.
Yeah, it's not. It's like that. It's a weird one.
Well, I have to say, Will, I really did enjoy the book a lot, and I'm looking forward to the next couple of volumes. Do you have a time frame on when the next book is coming out?
Well, no, I don't know. Like I've started it.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of chapters, and once when I'll be writing about that Madness gig, I think. But I like to when I did the first one. What I really liked about it was all the stuff when I was a kid. When the band starts, it's a bit like you're worried. It's just you don't want to step on anybody's toes or upset the apple cart too much. You have to because you're dealing with sensitive situation. But yeah, so and I like the social history aspect of the first one as well. Like there was a couple of people, like not many, but most people, well, nearly all people loved it. But there was a couple of people going, "Oh, he doesn't talk about the Bunnymen until the end." Well, it's like tough. It's my life. It's my memoir. It's like I wasn't all about the Bunnymen from the day I was born. There's more to it than that. But now we're into the Bunnymen. But I still want to put in things that are going on around in the periphery of because it sort of gives it like a flavor of what was going on in the world. And it's not like it wasn't all roses, you know. Like you said before, we were battling with the record label a lot. Don't think they've ever liked anything we've ever done.
I also think it's important that if you're going to write a book, a memoir, that you give people a sense of who you are as a person and why you're there, as opposed
Yeah,
to someone who's writing something and it's only about the band and it's only like a like an itinerary rather than an actual story. The book Bunnymen kind of gives you a sense of, well, who is Will Sargent, and I don't think
yeah,
there's any question about who Will Sargent is and where you come from. I mean,
yeah.
it's very, very clear, and the anecdotes in the book are great, and they're funny and they're interesting.
Well, they want to get the funny ones in there as well, like that, because we've had a lot of things that were funny,
Yeah.
but things that are funny to you aren't funny to others, and you can, get into trouble.
Well, I appreciate the time today. Best of luck with the book, and like I said, I'm looking forward to the next one coming out.
Nice one. Thanks a lot.
All right, I
Got it
appreciate
then.
it. Bye bye now.
See ya.
The name of Will Sargent's book is Bunnyman. Volume 2 and 3 are still on the way. I hope you liked the show. If you did, you can like it, share it, subscribe to it, tell all your friends about it, and you can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Canada Provisions for their support, and you can support them by logging on to CanadaProvisions.com. We'll see you next time on Baxi's Musical Podcast.